The UAW is on strike. This is a monumental strike. It is the first time that they've hit all big three, big 2.5
Hmm.
automakers at once. And it's also, yeah, it's also it's targeted. It's strategery, I believe, as
Hmm.
a former president of ours would say. So, Craig, hello, welcome. What is going on at the UAW?
I wish
What?
I knew. But I mean, the memories of the bankruptcy of two automakers are not too much of a distant memory at this point, right? And I will not. I certainly wouldn't say it was exclusively the UAW's fault, but certainly some rules that they had in place didn't help the situation for General Motors and at the time Chrysler.
Right.
Um, so yeah, are we going back to that? Who knows?
Who knows? It is an interesting time to have a strike. I believe that from a business sort of, I mean, even more from a societal sort of look, the UAW has a lot of leverage this time. I mean,
Hmm.
typically so in labor negotiations, there's typically a pendulum. Um, During one set of contract negotiations, usually it favors management, and then usually the next time a contract comes up for,
Hmm.
then it's goes to labor. It kind of goes back and forth.
Hmm.
That's sort of typically the way of things. With this UAW strike now, the ball is really very heavily in the UAW's favor. I mean, so we remember COVID pandemic, the panorama, as Disney calls it really did a number on the sort of whole supply chain and getting parts and components and stuff like that. But the advantage to having once inventory started to come back a little bit, then automakers started selling cars at a profit, at a fairly
Hmm.
significant profit. So during 2021, 2022, these automakers have made record profits on less sales.
Mm.
So you're now in a situation like, look, the UAW is like, hey, you guys are making a ton of money. And interest rates are through the roof right now. Depending on who you ask, inflation's still fairly, substantial. There is it's very expensive to buy a car right now. It is
Hmm.
very expensive to buy food right now. Uh, Student loan repayments restart this month. I just started repaying one of mine. Um, there's a lot of reason why labor would want to attempt to improve their situation,
Always,
and
yeah.
that's sort of where we're at. And it doesn't help management's concerns or problems when Mary Barrett goes on CNN, does an interview, and she can't justify her $29 million a
But then
year.
that's the thing. Nobody is worth $29 million. I'm sorry.
Right.
Maybe if you cured cancer or something, you're worth $29 million. But no, not at that level. I'm sorry. And
Yes.
there's the gap between average worker pay and CEO pay in this country is just completely out of whack, in my
Yes.
opinion.
And
And it's not, I don't think, sustainable, honestly.
a friend of ours, Craig, was comparing big three salaries, CEO salaries, executive salaries to like Akia, Toyota,
Hmm.
and some of the Japanese brands. And
Yeah.
I think Akia made 8 million last year,
Hmm.
so not a small amount of money.
No, you're not going to starve.
No,
Not at $8 million.
no, but it does seem that the US based companies tend to have higher executive pay than
Yes.
at least their Japanese counterparts, which,
Like every
um,
US company, I think, every
yeah,
industry, it seems. I'm
yeah,
sure there are exceptions, but yeah, like executive pay in the US seems to be a uniquely US
yeah.
problem.
Well, and what's interesting too, I mean, to keep this, definitely focused on EVs as we will through this entire conversation. Um, Mary Barra said that like something like 80 or 90% of her salary, of her pay, comes through performance bonuses. So
Mhm.
it's hitting performance metrics, and I have to ask Greg, what performance?
Yeah.
How many Hummers have they sold? How many lyrics have they sold? I've only started seeing those showing up in
Hmm.
deleveries. Rumor has it some
The
Blazers.
unbuildable Ultium platform. I
Yeah,
refer
rumor
to it
has
personally because they can't seem to get any of them out the door.
yeah. So if the plan is to go, everybody in EV, everybody in, um, then the metrics have to be so low. I
Let's also back up a second. What plants do we know? What plants are currently on strike, and do we know what
Yes,
the UAW demands are? Just so we
yeah.
have
So
like
let's
a framework
we
for
should
what's going
definitely
on.
do that. So right now, as it sits, there are 4 UAW plants, I believe, on strike, 3 with each automaker.
Mhm.
So, or sorry,
One,
1 with each
yeah.
automaker, and then ZF just announced that their plant in Tuscaloosa is striking right now.
Mm.
They make axles for Mercedes, which won't affect the EQS and EQE SUVs, I don't believe, but it will affect the gas cars that are built in Alabama. Uh, so for General Motors, it is their plant that builds Colorado and Canyon. I forget the exact location on that one. For Ford, it is their Wayne Assembly, which makes Broncos and Rangers,
Mhm.
and then the Toledo Assembly Complex for Jeep, which makes the Wrangler and the Gladiator. Uh, Maybe the most significant of the three.
I
Not just
would say
because
so.
the 4 by EP have stuff applies to us, but there's a lot
Money,
of
money, money.
there's a lot of
It
money
costs. I
there.
always joke. It costs $12 to build a Wrangler, and they're charging 50,000 because it's
Yeah,
not exactly new tech. It's Roman chariot level. The fundamentals of the vehicle are
right.
very old fashioned, effective
Yeah,
but old fashioned.
yes. But it's such a pivotal, and maybe just being in living where I do, living where you do, like Toledo is so significant to Jeep stories. So there's a lot of, I think, sentimentality that can go with that. And
Hmm.
in fact, you could argue that maybe shutting down Bronco production too is more of a ego play than it is actually anything else. Because what's interesting is they didn't target the truck plants.
Hmm.
They didn't go after the Ram, the Ram 1500. They didn't go after F-150. They
Hmm.
didn't go after the Indiana plant that builds uh, Canyon, or I'm sorry, Sierras and Silverados.
And maybe
Like,
they're starting soft and just slowly escalating, turning up the heat
yeah,
as the time goes on.
yeah. And what we've learned today with this Mercedes, I'm sorry, with this ZF strike is they can churn up the pressure on a non-unionized plant by striking at a union supplier
At the
for that
supplier.
plant.
Yes, very
Um,
shrewd.
yes, but we also learned today that Ford did come up with a tentative agreement with Unifor in Canada,
Hmm.
so that will
That's
avoid a
the
strike.
Canadian UAW, which I
Yes.
don't know what Unifor sounds like or what it means.
Yeah. So we've got the automotive news has been doing. They're actually very good at covering strikes,
Oh
especially
yeah.
Big Three. They're based in Detroit and all of that. So they've got sort of a nice chart on their website that shows us what the unions are asking for and what the automakers have sort of countered with. This may not be the most accurate. I mean, there's listing here, there's dates that show as it's as accurate as, but
Hmm.
long story short, UAW wants a 30%, 36% wage increase,
Yeah.
while the management on all three have been like 20.
Uh-huh.
Um,
I mean, 20 is
there's
a pretty good I'd take a 20% raise.
so did I. Oh wait, that gets awkward
You
really
can
quick.
do that for yourself, Chad. You're the boss. But
Yeah.
36, this is, I think, a case of asking for more than you expect, and then really,
Yes.
okay,
And
we're going to negotiate downward, and we'll both pretend we're happy.
yeah, and I
Uh,
feel like, and that is extremely important to remember for those who are watching. That's how these negotiations work. You always go in and ask for
mhm.
everything, and then eventually you get to a point where both sides aren't happy, and that's when you
Yep.
have a deal.
Yep.
So the some of the big stickling points: cost of living adjustments, how temporary workers are treated when they become full-time workers, retirement benefits. They've lately been doing 401ks instead of pensions, and they
Hmm.
would like to return to a pension process,
Yeah,
which
good
I would
luck.
like. Yeah, yeah, I'd like a pension
A
too.
defined benefit versus defined contribution. Yeah, I don't think
Yeah,
that gets very expensive very
it
quickly.
does indeed. Well, if
It
your
can.
chief executive's making 30 million a
But
year,
on the other hand, exactly, what is the C-suite earning?
right? And where this really becomes EV centric and EV focused, because right now, like I said, the only plant that's really even sort of in our wheelhouse is the Jeep plant with their 4xe stuff,
Mm-hmm.
is that we are coming up, and this is a part of the union's grievances, is we're coming up on a time where EV manufacturing is going to become much more common, and there's a lot fewer moving parts in an EV, so there's fewer things to assemble. You don't have an engine plant anymore, so they're looking for securities to their job in this environment where they may be working less,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of do want to work less. They want to do a 32-hour work week at 40 hours of pay. But dealers are also concerned about this. I've talked to manufacturers and dealer principals that are like, we don't have a service department anymore when there's no oil changes and things like that. So
be selling the used cars to make money.
Yeah, sell all the used cars. So, Craig, valid concerns at least on that end, would you say?
For the UAW
Yeah.
about potentially losing positions? Yeah, I mean, any organization of that size doesn't want to see its membership drop. So yes, negotiating as the future changes, as things change, yeah, it's not a bad idea to try and hold on to what you've got. But we'll have to see what happens here. I mean, I'm a huge supporter of organized labor. It has gotten us a lot of things, 40-hour work week, holidays, whatever, etc. And it's functionally, joining a union is really the only way you can check the power of a giant corporation or a company, right? Because the government's not going to do that. How else do you negotiate for more pay or better working conditions or whatever?
Right.
So I think unions certainly have a place, but the motto should really be don't get greedy, and that applies to the unions, and that applies to the executives, especially.
To provide
don't get greedy.
To provide a little bit of counter, I mean, I'm not saying I'm anti anything. UAW hasn't been the most clean, non-corrupt organization.
No.
There's some real. This is not a membership concern for their membership, but it is their leadership have gotten in trouble before, and not too long ago, which does create some ill will towards that particular collective bargaining group. And one thing to remember too about collective bargaining is once you unionize, everything has to be negotiated. So if you were happy with, let's say, your vacation benefits or your paid time off benefits you had at your employer, you don't automatically get to keep those when there's a negotiation. Everything gets and so that doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just that it's different, and through the negotiating process you may end up with different benefits or different compensation than what you had before. And is that typically better? Yeah, probably, but it's not always better. So just to bring some levity to the audience, I have an MBA, so I've had a few labor relations things,
courses, classes,
classworks, things like that. But it'll be interesting. I mean, it will be interesting as more plants convert to building EVs and what that does to the workforce.
9 in the chat room is being very active. They have mentioned liking Canada, but they also say MBA no good.
MBA no good.
They mentioned about the Toyota ET and GA, that those can be produced on the same assembly lines as gasoline-powered cars. So maybe the job losses aren't as big a concern.
Yeah, I think that, and 9, I think makes a really good. I think that's a really good point, right? Yes, the BZ4X doesn't have a motor, an engine, an internal combustion engine, but the retooling shouldn't be as difficult because you need sort of the same amount of workers and same amount of laborers for the rest of that. What about they mentioned Elon, a little bit of Tesla. We know that Tesla's traditionally they're not unionized. They're fairly anti-union.
I mean, every corporation, I think, is
okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, some are perhaps a bit more vocal about it in terms of union bashing.
Yes. Vocal.
And there's not too many EVs right now built in the United States that are built with unionized labor, with
That's true.
collective labor, because
That's true.
none of the Teslas are.
No.
The Nissan Leaf is built in Smyrna. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I don't think
I
any
don't
of
think. No, I
Nissan's
don't believe
plants
they're.
are.
No.
The Volkswagen ID4 plants
Chattanooga is not. I don't think.
Chattanooga's
At
not.
least it wasn't. I know when they built that for the Passat, they were trying to. This is,
Same
a
with
dozen years ago.
Same with that Mercedes plant in Tuscaloosa. Like they're like, hey, we're going to open a union branch. We're going to try to get, but they've never. I don't think they've ever made it there. So EQS, EQE, ID4, the Leaf, all of the Teslas.
The only two I can think of are Mach-E and Lightning, which are built.
Yeah, well, and Mach-E's
Well,
built in
Mach-E's in
Mexico.
Mexico. Yeah.
Right. So
The
that
Lightning.
leaves, so it leaves Lightning, and then Hummer, Lyric, Blazer, all that stuff that'll soon come out of Hamtramck.
Soon.
Eventually.
Eventually.
And I guess the Bolt.
Celestic.
Yeah, the Celestique. And then, of course, the Bolt and the Bolt EV, at least through the end of the year. So, I mean, those are the only, ones built with labor, with organized labor. So,
Yeah.
it's whatever. Again, the pendulum shift. The union will probably do pretty well in this negotiating, but when this contract's come up for renewal in a few years, when there are a lot more EVs and that becomes a concern, it's gonna be I think it's gonna be rough for the UAW because so few EVs are being built there, and new plants being built in the US to build EVs from, let's say, VinFast or Hyundai stuff. I'm sorry, electrified GV70 is also not built with union labor.
No, it's built in Montgomery, Alabama, but not
Montgomery.
Definitely not union.
And some stuff will be coming off of HMMA, which is also So, long story short, it'll be much more. I think it'll be much more difficult for them in the future to negotiate because these automakers will say, "Look, we're already building the majority of our EVs."
They should almost be more concerned about automation than EVs taking jobs away, but
or AI taking jobs away, but I don't really know about that. Nine also
Speaking of AI, I saw a stat that like almost 50% of all internet traffic is just bots or something. Have you heard that? Is that true?
I wouldn't be surprised. I was talking to one of our friends at GM the other day, and they're talking about how they're going to integrate AI with like their telematic stuff and things like that. I'm like, and I was like, why don't you write all of your work that you turn into your boss with AI until they realize that, and then they're going to realize, oh, this is stupid, and then stop this whole AI nonsense. But Nine mentions in the chat also that Tesla is loco, or I'm sorry, Elon is loco and not Tesla.
I partially agree. Definitely, Elon is insane.
Yeah, I if you
no questions there.
If you asked me if I agree with that statement, I would probably say yes.
But like for me, Tesla isn't a car builder; they're a hype builder in a lot of ways. They've done a lot to move the needles. They've introduced some amazing technology, but like when doors don't fit properly and when you can't deliver products that you've promised for years and years and years, that's
that's part of. I would say that again, my argument would be Elon's not disconnected enough from Tesla to not have some of his La Vida Loca rolling over to it. But I mean, Tesla's really like this channel wouldn't exist without Tesla. So, even though we don't cover them a lot, we wouldn't be having the EV conversations that we have. And every single automaker acknowledges that, whether it's public or private. We all know that we wouldn't be here without that. So how long do you think the strike will last?
I don't even know. It's a question. I mean, like, how long is a piece of string? Like, I mean, how quickly are management going to give in and give some ground to labor? What is the UAW going to be willing to sacrifice? Like a 4-day week sounds like untenable.
Well, it's not in Europe. It's very much a US cultural thing.
But
Yeah,
in Europe, everything is unionized, especially
it is.
manufacturing,
Yeah.
right? And I know in like Germany that the I believe the board of management at each company or corporation is required to have union representation on it,
Well,
because
and that
they've come to realize that shareholders are not the only stakeholders
right.
in a company.
Well, and interestingly, that Mercedes plant that we're talking about in Tuscaloosa is the only Mercedes plant, I believe, in the world that is not unionized.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
So it's yeah, it's a uniquely American phenomenon. Now, would I like to work for 4 days and get paid for 5 days worth of work? Well, I don't, I'm in a weird situation because I work like 7 days now. But a quote unquote normal job, I feel like there's been a lot of research recently on how effective a workforce is when they work less.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out in many cases they can actually be more productive. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just going to be hard to convince a lot of bean counters that this intangible thing needs time, and then you'll see tangible results. And
Yeah.
yeah,
But how long do you think the strike will last?
January.
Till January? Why January?
I
Why
just it's a feeling.
2 months?
I got a feeling.
The cold
No,
winter wind blows and everything's done. They want to go inside. No more
I
picket
think
lines.
right. I think right now the unions is too far apart from management, so from the UAW. So I think there's going to have to be some more public back and forth. We'll see what plants the UAW chooses to add to the
Mm-hmm.
strike on Friday. Because they didn't go for the jugular. They could
Yeah.
have said trucks. They could have just hit the trucks,
Yep.
and this it'd be over in a week. It'd be
Why
over.
don't they attack the sedan plant? Oh, wait.
Why don't they attack
Why
the
don't they want
three?
station wagon plans? Oh, man.
Yes. Dang it. Yeah.
Compact
So,
car. Oh, no.
I don't know.
So close.
Well, their strike fund, the UAW strike fund, is funded for 6 months. I believe they had said pre-strike. Now, $500 a week is probably less than what a lot of these union employees were making, so there might be some pressure there, but they're not. But they're not making money at all.
Yeah.
So they can entrench themselves. And what this does is this really messes with a very interesting time of year for an automaker. So I was talking to a friend at one of these automakers because we're trying to plan our coverage for
Mm-hmm.
what we're going to hit the rest of the year. And I've talked to two of those three automakers, and two of them have said, if there's a strike, we're changing our auto show announcements cadence. We're changing everything, like, because we can't necessarily do a big old song and dance when
We can't afford. You can't cry poverty and then spend millions of dollars on an auto show booth.
Yes, correct. That's not a good look. So will it affect, our LA Auto Show probably won't be affected too much. It's typically in EV world, that's typically a Korean and Japanese heavy show. But yeah. And also, like, as you get closer to the end of the year, there's usually car deals. There's usually incentives to purchase. That's how automakers will make their yearly sales quotas. Like, if there's not as much inventory, now they've prepared for this. They've stacked up inventory in advance of the strike. But if they run out of cars, then the UAW is in
that's
a
rather a
much
problem.
stronger. Yeah, then suddenly the UAW is in a much more significant bargaining position. So yeah, I'm thinking 6 months, January, February.
January.
Maybe.
Okay, we'll hold your feet to the fire.
Yeah, get through the holidays. Well, get through the holidays on only $500 a week when maybe you're used to double that or something.
I mean, you can see what they're asking for and glean how much they're making, probably.
Right. So
I get the impression that the UAW is kind of fighting for workers beyond their own membership, in their speaking out against the compensation gulf between executives and everyday workers, right?
This is
Do you get that sense?
This is the year of the strikes. Yeah, absolutely, they are. SAG-AFTRA is. Who knows when that's going to stop? FedEx avoided their strike.
UPS, right?
I'm sorry, UPS. I'm sorry. Yes, yeah. UPS avoided their strike. But but I don't know how long the president would have allowed a UPS strike continue either.
Well, I mean,
Because
same with the railroads. It's too
yeah,
important, but okay, we're not going to
yeah,
give you any sick days or whatever. At least that was what initially had happened. I
yeah,
haven't been following it closely enough to know. Did they gave them sick days or something? I can't remember the
right. Oh
situation.
yeah, I
I
don't
don't follow.
remember
We're not railroad
exactly.
pulse.
No, we aren't. But it is worth pointing out the government can claim basically national
Well,
security, national
if it's that
insurance.
important,
Yeah,
maybe they should be nationalized, and your CEO shouldn't get a giant golden parachute of millions of dollars.
Craig,
You know,
Craig, the internet's gonna come after you for saying that.
I don't care. Let them.
Let 'em. So yeah, does there any questions? I mean, I know Nine's been commenting
Nine
quite a
is
bit
gets
on
the MVP award
the
here for this episode.
MVP award, DTNGA,
Most valuable commenter, we'll say.
most valuable. Yeah, and it is. I mean, it really is important to mention again Tesla's influence sort of on our industry, on what we cover, and how they're very staunchly anti-union. That they've quashed attempts to unionize in Fremont, and Texas is not really a good labor. It's not really a labor-friendly state. So
Not traditionally, no.
there's some advantages to them moving there, and they still are the biggest player in EVs. So, does Tesla win if there's a long strike? I mean, do they win more? Do they gain more by the big three
quite
not building cars?
possibly. I mean, from an EV standpoint, a strike is not going to have much of an effect on the big three, right? I mean, how many EVs does Stellantis offer? I mean, GM isn't selling too many Ultium-based products. Ford has the Lightning and the Mach-E, but the Mach-E's not necessarily affected by the UAW since it is assembled in Mexico. Now, we don't know where all the parts are coming from, so there could be ancillary problems.
There's.
But it depends, if we're at a saturation point for EVs too, right? Haven't we seen much more increases in inventory of EVs sitting on dealership lots? So if we're at a point where the market is saturated, all the early adopters, so to speak, have their EV, maybe they're not going to go to Tesla either. People.
Right. Yeah. So I think we're starting to reach I don't want to say an overall EV saturation point, but a plateau. I think part of the inventory is coming back up is just supply chains have gotten better, and we've become so accustomed to over the last 2 or 3 years to dealerships not having cars that once you drive by a dealership and they have cars, you're like, oh, it's the end of the world, as Carriage would say, because wait, there's inventory. I think that's will EV demand just plateau for a bit? Maybe. Alan has joined.
Yes, I was just going to say we have another chatter. Yes.
So if we could pull up he just joined a minute ago. The general state of affairs of our economy. Yeah, we mentioned that a little bit before you got here, but yeah, it's really, again, it puts the union in a very strong negotiating position because general workers aren't making at least as much money as they believe they should be making as everything becomes much more expensive. I mean, we know things are expensive. And then you tack onto that how very public CEO pay is. It's interesting times. Loan viability or interest rates.
Interest is up a lot, right?
Interest rates are up. I don't think that would affect the cost of borrowing money, but if inventory were to decrease, deals won't happen, and we'll be back into the same situation we were in 2020 when there were no cars. Just we didn't have cars then because there were no chips. Now we'll have cars because nobody's building them. So that will drive up
chips or.
Yes.
Okay. Just checking.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for that. But that would also, I think, just drive up transaction prices, which are already ridiculously high. Or non-EV average transaction price last month was like 48 grand. EV transaction price was like 61, 62. Tesla's price really affects how EV average transaction.
I bet.
That's a lot of variability.
I'm sure they're the majority of the sales, if not the majority, then a strong plurality.
Yeah, so if Model 3, if they cut $5,000 off, let's say Model 3, like that's gonna drop probably ATPs down 3 or 4 grand. So
Mm-hmm.
they have a lot of control there. But just the any average transaction price at 48 grand is amazing. Friend of the channel, Eileen, sent me a screenshot of a Chevy Trax that you could lease for 48 months for $550 a month, which, if you did the math, is actually more expensive than what the car actually is.
No.
And you don't have the
No.
car at the
And you're
end.
driving a Chevy Trax.
Like, Chevy Trax. But I know like a Trax isn't an EV, but it just gives you the state of buying cars right now and how expensive it is. And yeah, it's uh, again.
I mean, like this. This reminds me of the Henry Ford $5 a day back in whatever it was, 1913 or something. Like what a groundbreaking moment that was to pay your factory workers enough that they can actually purchase the product that they're building, right? And one could argue really helped to build the middle class and spur industry and everything, because people have disposable income. They're going to be spending it now, right?
Right.
And do we need something like that? Do we need like a much higher minimum wage? Because if you look, the minimum wage has not kept pace with inflation. I think it would be in the 30, something I saw in the $30 range today. If it were compared to the 70s, for instance, if it were keeping pace with inflation, imagine how many more cars could be sold potentially and I'm not an economist, obviously. So I'm just thinking out loud here, because if there's more money changing hands, perhaps prices and inflation will be higher. But I'm just thinking, though, if people were paid more, they could buy more, which is the whole engine that drives the U.S. economy, right?
Well, capitalism is consumption based.
Yeah.
So when you have less consumption, whether that's due to people that are stashing away money or storing away money instead of spending it. One of the things that I find, we're going on to politics. Sorry, but one of the things I find frustrating about
they're linked.
They are. In this case, they very much are. Like when the government was giving everybody let's say the COVID payments, here we're going to give you $1,200 or whatever. Or in the past when they've given money to help spur the economy, when they give it to you in cash, typically people use that to pay down debt,
which doesn't help the economy.
Yes, it helps
because they're already leveraged.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do the Alan one? There's another. Does the big three like the timing of the strike? Yeah, I think so. Actually, I think they do. Their vehicles don't seem to be selling too well right now, so maybe they can justify similar to a plant shutdown. I think they like the timing just because there's things keep getting worse, right? Like this is the year of the strikes, and obviously they couldn't move up contract negotiations ahead of whatever, so they didn't have a lot of control over that. But I think they're in it for the long haul, and being strategic about suppliers like what they're doing in Tuscaloosa with ZF. That's going to really, I mean, you go strike the company that builds F-150 frames instead of building, and then suddenly,
I mean, it can be like the company that makes a plastic clip that holds the sun visor on or something. If you don't have that, you can't sell the car.
Like
right?
If you're that one company that makes that LED, the LCD clock in Toyotas that every Toyota used to
they've
have
had since the 70s, probably.
Yes. You strike that plant, you shut down all Toyota production.
Yes.
They've sadly moved on from that.
And drum brakes on the Tacoma, if you can believe it.
Believe it. Tacoma, yeah. Next year for the hybrid. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Juan, for the comment.
Yes, thank you.
Appreciate you. So I don't know. I thought it was we felt that it was worth discussing. I know it's not super EV focused right now, but there are, I think, some very large ramifications with EV production if these strikes continue. And yeah, it's also just dominating automotive news right now. Like nobody wants to talk about anything else because it's strike.
Yes.
It's strike.
Labor.
Strike. Labor. Yeah. So it's we're gonna be here a while. I feel like
Till January if your prediction holds out.
if
Maybe
my
I'll take the opposite stance. I'll say we'll be done before Thanksgiving.
yeah,
We'll see.
maybe.
We'll see.
So
Because who wants to live off $500 a week? That's tough from the strike fund. And if you get a 10% raise rather than 20% raise, I think you'll be okay.
yeah, well, who knows? Who knows where they'll come to an agreement on? But it's a sticky wicket. I
to
believe
use a cricket
is
term,
a
sport I have no idea how you actually play, but I do know that.
Does anybody in the chat know how to play cricket?
I bet they do. Or I could just read the Wikipedia page, but I mean, like reading is a lot of effort. So
reading is a lot of effort. But we're gonna do a beautiful segue to a call to action here, Craig. Do you know what's not a lot of effort?
Sleeping, napping, sitting.
Watching your review of the Tuscaloosa built, I believe, Mercedes-Benz EQE SUV by clicking right here on the screen. I'll point somewhere.
In fact, now I have to go look because that sounds right, but it also sounds wrong.
Well, if we are wrong,
I'm going to pull up I want to make sure it's the EQE SUV. Okay.